You are sitting somewhere right now. Maybe you can hear the hum of a refrigerator in another room, or the distant sound of traffic, or nothing but the quiet pressure of silence. Whatever you hear, it arrived without asking permission. It is already changing. Even as I say this, the sound you noticed a moment ago has shifted, softened, or disappeared entirely. This is not a metaphor. This is direct experience. And if you stay with it just a little longer, you begin to notice something the Buddha pointed to again and again. Everything you can perceive is moving. Nothing holds still. Not the sounds around you, not the temperature of your hands, not even the thought you had 3 seconds ago about whether you are doing this correctly. The Buddha called this anicca, impermanence. But he did not mean it as philosophy. He meant it as something you can see for yourself, right now, in the ordinary unfolding of your life. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a river, not a dramatic river, not white water or a waterfall. Just a wide, steady river moving past you in the late afternoon. At first glance, it looks like one thing: the river, solid, continuous. You could point at it and say, there it is, the same river I saw yesterday. But if you watch more closely, you see that what you are calling the river is actually countless drops of water, each one arriving and departing, none of them staying. The river is not a thing. It is a process, a verb pretending to be a noun. Your experience is like this. What you call your mood is not one solid thing. It is a stream of sensations, thoughts and reactions, each one appearing and dissolving. What you call your body is a collection of processes, breathing and digesting and healing and wearing down, none of it fixed. Even what you call yourself, the sense of I, of me, is not as solid as it seems. This is the first mark of existence, impermanence. And when you see it clearly, not as an idea but as the actual texture of your life, something begins to shift. Because if everything is changing, then clinging becomes painful. You reach for something, a feeling, a moment, a version of yourself, and try to hold it in place. But it is already moving, already different. The effort to freeze it, to make it stay, creates a kind of fiction. The Buddha called this dukkha, often translated as suffering, but closer to unsatisfactoriness or stress, or the subtle ache of things not quite fitting. You have felt this. The way a good mood starts to fade and you try to keep it alive by thinking about it, analyzing it, which only makes it slip away faster. The way you brace against discomfort, tightening around it, which makes the discomfort sharper. The way you try to return to a memory of how things used to be and feel the gap between then and now like a small grief. This is the second mark, dukkha. Not because life is only suffering, but because clinging to what cannot be held creates suffering. The river keeps moving. Your hands keep grasping. And underneath both of these, underneath the changing and the clinging, is a third mark, anatta, often translated as no self. But that phrase can sound abstract, even frightening. What it points to is simpler. There is no separate, permanent thing at the center of your experience that owns it all. Go back to the river. If you try to find the river itself, apart from the water and the movement and the banks and the light on the surface, you cannot. The river is not hiding somewhere behind these things. It is these things in relation. Remove any part, and the river changes. It has no core. Your sense of self is like this. When you look closely, you find sensations, thoughts, memories, reactions, but no solid, unchanging thing called you underneath them. Just process, just flow. The sense of I is something that arises moment by moment in response to experience. It is real in the way the river is real. But it is not what you thought it was. This is not meant to be disturbing. In fact, it is the opposite. Because if there is no fixed self to protect, no permanent thing that can be damaged or lost, then the clinging softens, the fear softens. You are not trying to hold the river in your hands anymore. You are standing at the edge, watching it move, and you are part of the movement too. The three marks are not separate teachings. They are three ways of seeing the same truth. Everything changes. Clinging to what changes creates suffering. And what you thought was solid, separate, permanent, is actually open, connected, and free. So we begin here, not with belief, but with attention, not with answers, but with willingness to look. You stand on a bridge and look down at the water. The surface catches the light. It seems calm, almost still. You could believe the river is a solid thing, something you could name and return to. But if you watch long enough, you notice a leaf drifting past, then a ripple, then the way the light shifts as the current moves beneath. The river was never still. You were only standing far enough away to miss the movement. This is what the Buddha pointed to when he said that all conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. He wasn't offering philosophy. He was describing what happens when you look closely at anything in your experience and see that it will not hold still. We live as though the world around us is stable. We treat our thoughts as fixed positions. We hold our feelings as though they define us. We look at the people we love and assume they will remain exactly as they are. This assumption feels natural. It feels true. But it is the source of a quiet, persistent ache. The ache comes from holding on. When you believe something should stay and it moves, you feel the friction. The job that seemed secure shifts. The mood that felt permanent dissolves. The body that once moved easily begins to tire. And because you expected stillness, the movement feels like a betrayal. But nothing betrayed you. The river was always flowing. Impermanence is not a problem to solve. It is the nature of conditioned things. Anything that arises because of causes and conditions will change when those causes and conditions change. Your breath moves, your heartbeat shifts, the temperature of your skin rises and falls. These are not failures of your body. They are how a living body works. The same is true for everything you experience. A thought appears because something triggered it. It stays for a moment, then it fades. A sound arises, it fills the space, then it's gone. Even the feeling of you shifts throughout the day. The person who woke up this morning is not identical to the person reading now. Something has changed. You can test this. You don't need to believe it first. Just notice 3 things that have changed since you woke up today. Not big things, small ones. Maybe the light in the room has shifted. Maybe your hunger has come or gone. Maybe a thought you had earlier has lost its urgency. These are not special moments. They are ordinary ones, but they show you the river moving. When you start to notice change this way, something softens. You stop waiting for things to freeze in place. You stop resisting the next shift. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop demanding that what you care about remain motionless. You can love the river without needing it to stop flowing. The breath is the simplest place to feel this. Sit for a moment and notice one full breath. The inhale begins. It peaks. It ends. The exhale begins. It empties. It ends. There is a pause. Then the next breath starts, and it is not the same as the one before. The rhythm changes, the depth changes. You are watching impermanence in real time, in your own body. This is not an idea you think about. It is something you sense. The breath does not ask for your belief. It simply moves. And as you watch it move, you start to see that everything else moves in the same way. The tightness in your shoulders, the mood that seemed so heavy a moment ago, the worry that felt permanent. All of it is like the river from the bridge. It looks still until you pay attention. When you see this with your own awareness, something shifts. You stop clinging so hard. Not because you've been convinced by an argument, but because you felt the truth of it in your own experience. You've watched the breath change, you've noticed the light shift, you felt a thought arrive and dissolve, and in that noticing, the grip loosens. This is what the teaching points to, not that you should accept impermanence as a belief, but that when you see it clearly, you stop fighting what is already happening. You turn away from suffering not by effort, but by seeing. The river flows, it always has, and you, standing on the bridge, can finally let it. You sit down and feel the breath move through you. The chest rises, the belly softens. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question forms, who is breathing? It sounds simple, but if you stay with it, the question begins to shift something. You notice the breath, you notice the noticing, and then you wonder, where exactly are you in all of this? We spend most of our lives assuming there is someone solid at the center, a self that watches, a self that decides, a self that owns the breath, the thought, the feeling. We say, my breath, my body, my mind, as if there were a landlord living inside, managing the property. And this assumption feels so natural that we never think to question it. But the Buddha pointed to something different. He said that in the seen, there is only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. No one behind it, just the seeing, just the hearing. The experience itself, arising and passing with no separate owner required. This is not philosophy. It is something you can observe directly, right now, in the body. Sit quietly and let the breath come and go. Do not control it. Just watch. And then ask softly, who is aware of this breath? At first, the mind will answer quickly. I am, it says. I'm the one watching. But if you stay with the question, something loosens. You notice that the I you are pointing to is also just a thought. It arises, it passes, it is not solid, it is not constant. It is more like a wave that rises and falls, but is never separate from the ocean. The wave looks distinct. It has a shape, a crest, a moment of presence. But it is not other than water. It does not exist apart from the ocean. It rises because conditions allow it. It falls because conditions change. And when it falls, nothing is lost. The ocean remains. This is what the Buddha meant by non-self. Not that you do not exist, but that you do not exist in the way you think you do. You are not a fixed thing. You are a process, a flow, a series of moments strung together so quickly that they create the illusion of continuity. Breathing happens, awareness happens, thinking happens, but there is no separate you standing behind it all, pulling the strings. There is only the happening itself. This can feel disorienting at first. We are so used to the sense of being someone. The idea of letting that go can seem like a loss, even a kind of death. But what the Buddha is pointing to is not emptiness in the sense of absence. It is emptiness in the sense of openness, space, freedom. When you stop clinging to the idea of a solid self, you also stop carrying its weight. You stop defending it. You stop needing to prove it. You stop feeling crushed when it is criticized or inflated when it is praised. You begin to see that all of it, praise, blame, success, failure, is just weather passing through. None of it defines you, because there is no fixed thing to define. Sit with the breath again, let it move, and ask once more, who is aware? This time, do not rush to answer. Let the question hang in the air. Notice what happens when you do not grab for a conclusion. Notice the space that opens when you stop insisting on being someone. You might notice that awareness itself does not need a name. It does not need a story. It is simply here, like light in a room. The light does not belong to the room. It is not produced by the walls. It is just present, illuminating whatever arises. The breath comes in. The breath goes out. Sensations appear in the body. Sounds arrive from outside. Thoughts drift through like clouds, and awareness meets all of it without effort, without ownership, without needing to be anything other than what it is. The wave rises and falls, but the ocean does not rise and fall with it. The ocean holds all waves, all movements, without being disturbed. And you are not the wave. You are not even the ocean. You are the knowing that sees both. Stay with the breath. Let the question dissolve. Let the need to answer dissolve with it. What remains is just this: breathing. Awareness. The simple fact of being here without the burden of being someone in particular. When the question no longer pulls at you, when it fades into the background and all that is left is the quiet rhythm of breath moving through space, you have arrived. Not at an answer, but at the living truth the question was always pointing toward. There is a way we hold experience that feels instinctive, almost invisible. Something pleasant arises and we want it to continue. Something unpleasant appears and we want it gone. This movement happens so quickly, we rarely notice the tightening itself. We only feel the result, a low hum of dissatisfaction, a sense that things are never quite right. The Buddha pointed to this pattern with unusual precision. He spoke of 3 characteristics that mark all experience. 3 truths we can observe directly if we look closely enough. Everything that arises is impermanent. Everything that arises carries within it a quality of unsatisfactoriness, not because life is bleak, but because nothing can be held in place. And everything that arises is not self, not a possession we can claim as fundamentally ours. These aren't philosophical positions to adopt. They're observations available right now in the texture of this moment. But we live as though the opposite were true. We reach for experiences as if they could be frozen, as if pleasure could be locked into place and pain could be permanently expelled. It's like closing your hand around water, expecting to hold it still. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. This reaching, this grasping, is what the Buddha called craving. It's not desire itself. Desire is natural, part of being alive. Craving is what happens when desire hardens into insistence. When we move from "this is pleasant" to "this must continue," from "this is unpleasant" to "this must stop now." The shift is subtle, but the consequences are not. You can feel craving in the body if you pay attention. It has a quality of leaning forward, of tightness in the chest or jaw, of holding your breath without realizing it. Sometimes it shows up as restlessness, a need to adjust or fix or move on to the next thing. Sometimes it's quieter, just a faint sense of incompleteness, as though something is missing from this moment. Consider a simple example. You're drinking tea and it's exactly the right temperature, the flavor clear and warm. For a moment there's just the experience itself. Then a thought arrives. I wish this could last. The hand closes. The body tenses slightly. You're no longer tasting the tea. You're trying to hold on to the memory of how good it was a moment ago, which means you've already left the present. The tea cools. The moment passes. And there's a faint disappointment so familiar you might not even name it. Or the opposite movement. You're sitting in a waiting room and there's a sound. Someone's phone buzzing repeatedly. Irritation rises. The body tightens. The mind narrows around a single thought. Make it stop. You're no longer hearing a sound. You're pushing against reality, insisting it should be different. The sound continues or it doesn't, but the suffering isn't in the sound itself. It's in the pushing. This is where the teaching becomes practical rather than abstract. You don't need to eliminate desire or become indifferent to life. You only need to notice the moment when wanting becomes clinging, when preference becomes demand. Notice one moment today when you wanted something to stay or go, not to judge it or fix it, just to see it clearly. What does that wanting feel like in your body? Where does it live? Is there tension, heat, a sense of leaning or pulling? The hand closes around water and finds it slipping through. This isn't a failure of technique, it's the nature of water. And it's the nature of experience. Pleasure arises and passes. Pain arises and passes. Thoughts, sensations, emotions, all of it moving through like weather. We can meet this movement with openness or we can fight it. But fighting it doesn't change what's happening. It only adds a layer of struggle on top of what's already here. When you catch yourself in that moment of craving, something shifts. Not dramatically, not permanently, but for an instant you're no longer identified with the wanting. You're the awareness that notices the wanting. And in that gap, however brief, there's a quality of ease. The body softens slightly. The breath deepens. You're still in the same situation, but you're not at war with it. This is what the Buddha meant when he said that clinging to what is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self brings suffering. He wasn't making a moral judgment. He was describing a mechanism, the way you might describe how a door opens or how water flows downhill. When you try to hold what cannot be held, friction is inevitable. When you see this clearly, not as an idea but as a felt reality in your body, the grip begins to loosen on its own. There is a space between two notes that makes the music possible. Without it, sound becomes only noise. Without it, melody collapses into a wall of sensation with nowhere to land. We know this when we listen to music. We feel it. But we forget it the moment we step back into our days. We fill every gap. Between waking and standing, we reach for the phone. Between one task and the next, we open a screen. Between someone's words and our reply, we push sound into the air before their meaning has even arrived. We are so afraid of the gap that we pave over it again and again with anything that will cover the silence. And in doing so, we miss what is already here. The three marks of existence, impermanence, non-self, and unsatisfactoriness, are not ideas to be learned. They are not philosophy. They are the texture of direct experience, visible only when we stop layering noise over the surface of things. But the instant you speak about a thing, you miss the mark. The instant you try to capture what is alive and moving, you are holding a photograph of something that has already changed. This is not a failure. It is simply what happens when we mistake the map for the territory, when we mistake the word for the thing itself. Impermanence is not a concept you understand. It is the coolness of the air that was warm a moment ago. It is the way your body feels different now than it did when you sat down. It is the fact that the person you are speaking to is not the same person they were yesterday, and neither are you. But if you are already talking, already filling the space with your next point, your next story, your next need to be seen, how will you notice? The space between two notes is where impermanence lives. It is where you can feel one thing ending and another beginning, but only if you let the space remain. Non-self is even quieter. It does not announce itself. It does not argue. It simply withdraws when you try to grab it. You think you are a solid thing, a continuous self that moves through time. But if you pause, if you really pause, you will notice that what you call I is more like weather, a shift of mood, a sensation in the chest, a thought that arises and dissolves. There is no center that holds still. There is only this, and then this, and then this. But we do not pause. We speak over the gap. We assert ourselves into the space before we've even felt what is there. And so we miss the mark, again and again, not because we are careless, but because we are afraid of what the silence might reveal. Unsatisfactoriness is the friction of this, the low hum of always needing the next thing. The sense that whatever is happening now is not quite enough. We reach for our phone because the present moment feels thin. We interrupt because silence feels like absence. We fill the gap because the gap feels like lack. But the gap is not lack. The gap is the condition that makes contact possible. When you pause for 3 breaths before responding to someone today, you are not doing this to be polite. You are not doing this to seem calm or wise. You are doing this to feel the space between 2 notes, to notice what happens in your body when you do not rush to fill the air, to see if the thing you are about to say is actually true, or if it was only a reflex, a way to cover the discomfort of not knowing what comes next. 3 breaths, not as a rule, not as a technique to master, but as a way of meeting what is here. In the first breath, you might notice the urge to speak. It will feel strong. It will feel like the right thing to do. Let it be there without acting on it. In the second breath, you might notice what the other person actually said. Not what you thought they said, not what you are preparing to argue against, but the words themselves and the feeling underneath them. In the third breath, you might notice the space, the quiet that is not empty, the silence that holds everything without needing to be filled. And then, if you speak from there, from the space between the notes, from the place where impermanence is felt, where the solidity of self softens, and where the need to fill every gap begins to release. This is not about becoming someone who never speaks. It is about learning to hear the music instead of only the noise. It is about noticing that the mark you keep missing is not somewhere far away. It is right here, in the space you keep covering over. The silence does not need your help. It is already spacious. It is already here. We spend most of our lives telling stories about the body. The knee hurts, and immediately we're narrating how it started, what it means, whether it will get worse, what we should have done differently. The breath feels tight, and we're already 3 steps ahead, wondering if we're getting sick, remembering the last time this happened, planning what to do next. We live in this layer of commentary, this constant translation of sensation into meaning, and we forget that underneath all those stories, something simpler is happening. The body is just being a body. There's a teaching in the early tradition that sounds almost too plain to be profound. Observe the body in the body, feelings in feelings. Don't add, don't subtract, just see what's actually here, not the story about what's here, not the judgment of what's here, the thing itself. A weather station records temperature without complaining about the cold. It doesn't argue with winter or wish for spring. The thermometer drops, and the station simply notes 20 degrees, 15 degrees, 10. It's built to register what is, not to have opinions about what is. This kind of attention isn't cold or mechanical. It's actually the opposite. It's intimate. It gets close enough to experience that interpretation falls away. When you bring this quality of attention to your own body, something shifts. You might notice tension in your shoulders, but instead of immediately asking why or trying to fix it, you just feel the sensation itself. Tightness, pressure, maybe a dull ache that pulses slightly with your heartbeat. The sensation has texture. It has location. It changes if you stay with it. But the moment you label it as bad or start the story about how you always carry stress there, you've left the body and entered the commentary. This is where the 3 marks of existence become visible, not as concepts, but as direct experience. Impermanence shows itself when you notice that no sensation stays exactly the same. The tightness shifts. The ache moves slightly. Even pain that feels solid and unchanging is actually a river of micro-sensations flowing through. But you only see this if you're watching the body itself, not your thoughts about the body. You can try this now, if you'd like. Start at the top of your head, not thinking about your head, but feeling it. Is there warmth, coolness, tingling, pressure? Move slowly down, your forehead, your jaw. Notice if you're clenching without realizing it, your neck and shoulders, your chest. Can you feel your breath moving there? Or is it more subtle than that? Keep going. Your arms, your hands, your belly, your legs, your feet against whatever they're touching. The practice isn't to find something special or to make sensations appear, it's just to notice what's already happening. Name 3 sensations as you go. Just 3. Warmth in the palms, pressure where your body meets the chair, a slight tingling in your left foot. The naming helps you stay honest. It keeps you from drifting back into the story layer. A weather station recording data. What you might notice is how much the body is doing without your permission or control. Your heart beats, your lungs fill, temperature regulates, sensations arise and pass. This isn't something you're making happen. It's not something you can stop from happening. The body is being lived, and you're aware of it being lived. This is the second mark, not self. Not that you don't exist, but that the body isn't a possession you control. It's a process you're participating in. The third mark is harder to see at first, but it's always there. Suffering arises when we argue with what the body is doing, when we want the ache to stop, the tension to release, the tiredness to lift. The weather station doesn't suffer from the cold because it doesn't want the cold to be different. It just registers. When you can meet sensation the same way, even for a moment, something relaxes. Not because the sensation changed, but because the argument stopped. This doesn't mean you ignore pain or refuse to care for the body. It means you feel what's actually here before you react. You let the sensation be a sensation before it becomes a problem to solve. Most of the time, we're so busy interpreting that we never actually feel. We skim the surface, grab a quick label, and move into strategy. But the body is patient. It's always here, always offering direct experience, always ready to show you what's real beneath the story. Right now, your body is giving you information. Temperature, texture, pressure, ease, resistance. You don't have to do anything with it. You can just let it be data. Warmth here, tightness there, breath moving, sensation arising. This is the body in the body, nothing added, nothing taken away. There is a moment you may have known. A small pain arrives, a thorn presses into your palm, or your shoulder tightens, or your stomach clenches with something unnameable. And before you've even looked at it clearly, your hand closes. The muscles around the thorn grip down. You think you are protecting yourself, but the pressure makes the point dig deeper. This is what we do with discomfort. We meet it with refusal. The body tenses. The mind says no. And that no becomes a second pain, wrapped tightly around the first. The Buddha spoke simply about this. Pain is inevitable, he said. Suffering is the resistance to pain. He did not say this to be clever. He said it because he watched his own mind closely and saw what happened when pain arrived. He saw the difference between the sharp edge of experience and the story that forms around it. One is direct, the other is built. When you clench your hand around a thorn, you cannot tell anymore where the thorn ends and the clenching begins. The whole hand throbs. You might even forget there is a thorn at all. You only know that your hand hurts and you want it to stop, and it will not stop, and now you are angry or afraid or exhausted. This is aversion. Not the pain itself, but the tightening around it. Aversion feels urgent. It feels like the only reasonable response. Of course you pull away from what hurts. Of course you brace. But if you watch closely, you will notice that the bracing does not end the pain. It amplifies it. It turns a single sensation into a knot of resistance. And that knot takes up more space than the original ache ever did. This is one of the 3 marks of existence the Buddha pointed to. Not just that pain arises, but that we add to it by refusing its presence. Impermanence means that pain will shift and change. Non-self means there is no solid thing being threatened. And this third mark, often called dukkha, is not only about pain. It is about the fiction we create when we insist that what is happening should not be happening. You can see this in small moments. A sound irritates you. Your jaw tightens. Your thoughts loop into complaint. The sound itself is just vibration in the air. But the tightening, the looping, the inner argument with reality, that is something you are doing, and it costs you. You can also see it in larger pains, grief, loneliness, fear. These are not small. They are real weight. But even here, there is a difference between the grief itself and the voice that says you should not feel this way, that something is wrong with you for feeling it, that it will never end. That voice is the clenching. It does not protect you. It makes the thorn press deeper. So what do you do instead? You cannot simply decide not to feel pain. That would be another kind of resistance. But you can notice the moment when the clenching begins. You can feel the impulse to tighten, and instead of following it all the way, you can soften. This is not easy. It is not comfortable, but it is possible. When discomfort arises, you can stay with it for 5 breaths before you react. You do not have to fix it or understand it or make it go away. You only have to let it be there without adding your refusal to it. 5 breaths, in and out. The sensation remains. You remain. But the hand does not clench. This is not about enduring pain heroically. It is about seeing clearly. When you soften around discomfort, even slightly, you begin to notice its actual shape. You notice that it moves, it pulses or fades or shifts location. It is not as solid as you thought. And you notice that you are not as fragile as you thought. You can hold space for this without collapsing. The thorn is still there. But when your hand relaxes, you can finally see it. You can feel where it entered and how deep it goes, and sometimes, just by softening, the thorn works its way out on its own. Not always, but sometimes. And even when it does not, the suffering is less, because suffering was never the thorn. It was the fist you made around it. This is what the marks of existence reveal. Not that life is only pain, but that we do not have to double it. We do not have to meet every discomfort with a wall. We can meet it with breath, with attention, with the quiet choice not to clench. 5 breaths, that is all. When the tightness comes, when the refusal rises, you pause. You feel the urge to brace, and you soften instead. You let the discomfort be exactly what it is, no more and no less. And in that softening, something shifts. Not the pain itself, but your relationship to it. You are no longer fighting, you are present. And presence, even in pain, is not suffering. There is a moment you may recognize. Someone says something that lands wrong, and before any thought forms, your body tightens. Your jaw sets. A heat rises in your chest. And somewhere beneath that heat is a single impulse, to correct them, to explain yourself, to restore what feels suddenly threatened. But what exactly is being threatened? The Mahayana teachings offer a question that cuts through the urgency. The self is like a dream figure, they say, who is there to protect? When you wake from a dream, the person you were in that dream dissolves completely. The one who was running or falling or speaking. They never had substance outside the dream itself. And yet while the dream unfolded, that figure felt utterly real. It had preferences. It could be embarrassed. It needed things. The teachings suggest that waking life operates in much the same way. Not that you are unreal, but that the self you defend so fiercely is more like a process than a thing. It arises moment by moment, assembled from memory, sensation, perception, and habit. It feels continuous because the assembly happens so quickly. But when you look closely, what you find is not a solid core, but a streaming. Consider a shadow on the wall. It appears because of light and form, but it has no substance of its own. You could pass your hand through it 1,000 times and never injure it. It cannot be damaged because there is nothing there to damage. The shadow simply is as long as conditions allow it. This is not meant to erase your experience. You feel pain, you have memories, you make choices. But the one who feels threatened when criticized, the one who needs to be seen a certain way, that figure is more like the shadow than you might assume. It appears, it shifts with conditions. And it cannot actually be harmed, because it was never solid to begin with. The exhaustion comes from trying to protect what does not need protection. You brace against a comment. You rehearse a conversation in your mind, correcting what someone said, defending your position. You adjust your behavior so others will see you as capable or kind or unbothered. And beneath all of this is the unspoken belief that if you do not maintain the image, something essential will be lost. But the image was always optional. There is a practice that makes this visible. It does not require sitting still or closing your eyes. It simply asks you to notice one moment when you felt defensive, and then to ask with genuine curiosity what was being defended. Not in a harsh way, not to shame yourself for caring, but to actually look. Was it your reputation, your sense of being a good person, the belief that you are competent or fair or misunderstood? And if you can name it, then ask one more question. Who is this for? Often what you find is that the defended thing is a story about who you are, or who you should be, or how others should see you. And the story feels so necessary that any challenge to it registers as danger. But a story is not a self. It is something the mind builds and rebuilds and then protects as if it were load-bearing. The shadow on the wall does not worry about its shape. It does not tense when something passes through it. It simply reflects the conditions that give rise to it, moment by moment, without grasping. This is not about becoming passive. You can still speak clearly. You can still set boundaries. You can still care how you are treated. But the urgency changes when you see that the self you were defending is not a fixed thing that can be destroyed. It is more like weather. It forms, it shifts, it disperses. And what remains is the simple fact of being here, responsive, alive. When defensiveness arises, the impulse is to justify it or push it away. But there is another option. You can meet it with interest. You can feel the tightness in your chest and recognize it as the body's attempt to protect something. And then you can ask, very softly, is there actually something here that can be injured? Not as a way to dismiss your feelings, but as a way to see through the urgency. To recognize that the one who feels attacked is a construct assembled in real time, and that beneath the construct is something that was never at risk. The teaching does not ask you to stop caring. It asks you to stop exhausting yourself in service of a dream figure, to see that the self you have been guarding so carefully is already and has always been as insubstantial as a shadow, and that this is not a loss, it is a kind of freedom. You sit down with good intentions. You want to be more present, more calm, less reactive. You've read about awareness, and it sounds like exactly what you need. So you close your eyes and try to watch your thoughts. But within moments, something shifts. You're no longer just watching. You're scanning for problems. You're grading yourself. You're using awareness like a flashlight, hunting for what needs to be fixed. This is where we get tangled. We take something simple and turn it into a project. Awareness becomes another task on the list, another way to improve ourselves, another performance we're trying to perfect. The three marks of existence point to something else entirely. They're not ideas to master or goals to achieve. They're descriptions of what's already happening. Everything that arises passes away. Nothing has a fixed, separate self. And when we try to hold on to what changes or control what has no center, we create friction. That friction is suffering. But even knowing this, we reach for awareness as if it were a tool. We think If we just observe carefully enough, we'll finally get it right. We'll become the person who no longer struggles, the person who's figured it out. A mirror reflects everything but holds on to nothing. It doesn't choose what appears in it. It doesn't push away the difficult images or cling to the pleasant ones. It simply shows what's there, and when the thing moves on, the mirror is clear again. This is closer to what awareness actually is. Not a tool you wield, but a quality that's already present when you stop trying so hard. The Zen teachers say, just sit. Let thoughts come and go, like clouds. Do not chase them or push them away. This sounds almost too simple. You might wonder if you're doing it right, if something more should be happening. But that wondering is just another cloud. That urge to check your progress is another cloud. The slight frustration that you're still thinking is another cloud. You don't have to empty the sky, you just have to stop grabbing at what passes through it. When you sit for 5 minutes and let everything be exactly as it is, you're not trying to achieve a particular state. You're not working towards stillness or peace or insight. You're simply allowing what's already here to be here. A sound arises. You hear it. It fades. A thought appears. You notice it. It dissolves. An itch on your ankle. A tightness in your jaw. The hum of the refrigerator. All of it coming and going. None of it requiring your intervention. This is where the 3 marks become visible. Not as concepts, but as direct experience. You see impermanence in real time. Thoughts don't last. Sensations shift. Even the sense of being the one who's watching changes moment to moment. And when you're not trying to control any of it, when you're not turning awareness into a tool for fixing yourself, there's a natural equanimity. Not indifference, not detachment. Just a quiet steadiness that can hold whatever arises. The mirror doesn't get tired of reflecting. It doesn't prefer one image over another. It doesn't worry about whether it's mirroring correctly. It simply does what it does, without effort, without agenda. You can sit this way too. Not because you're trying to be like a mirror, but because awareness already works this way when you're not interfering with it. When a difficult emotion appears, you don't have to analyze it or push it away or figure out where it came from. You can let it be there, the way the mirror lets an image be there. When a pleasant thought arises, you don't have to hold on to it or make it mean something about your progress. You can let it pass, the way the mirror lets an image pass. This isn't passivity. It's the opposite of passivity. It takes a kind of courage to stop managing your inner life, to stop treating your mind like a problem that needs solving. It takes trust to simply sit and let everything be as it is, even when what arises is uncomfortable or confusing or boring. So you sit 5 minutes. You're not trying to become aware, you already are aware. You're just letting that awareness be what it is without turning it into a project. Thoughts come, they go. Sounds appear, they fade. Sensations rise and fall. And underneath all of it, or maybe threaded through all of it, there's a steadiness that doesn't need you to do anything at all. You're not chasing clouds, you're not pushing them away. You're just here, noticing what moves through the sky, noticing what it feels like to let it move. You've seen a child on the beach, crouched low in the sand, building a castle with all the seriousness of an architect. Towers rise, walls take shape, a moat gets carved with careful fingers. The child knows the tide is coming, everyone knows. But the hands keep building, shaping, perfecting. There's something beautiful in this, and something almost unbearable to watch. We do this too. Not with sand, but with everything we touch. We build our lives as if the tide will never come. We arrange our days, our relationships, our identities, as if they could be made permanent through enough care, enough control, enough refusal to look at what's already moving. The Buddha called this the root of sorrow. Not the fact that things change, but our insistence that they shouldn't. We take what is fluid by nature and demand it hold still. We take what is passing through and try to make it stay. And when it moves anyway, as it always does, we call this betrayal. We call it loss. We call it unfair. But nothing promised to stay. Your body didn't. Your thoughts don't. The people you love are moving through time just as you are. The feeling you had this morning has already shifted into something else. Even the self you think you are is not the same self that began reading these words. This is the first mark of existence the Buddha pointed to: impermanence. Not as philosophy, but as direct fact. Everything that arises also passes. Everything that comes together will come apart, not eventually. Now, always now. The changing isn't waiting to happen. It's the very texture of what is. And yet we live as if we can freeze what we love. We hold our relationships like contracts that guarantee permanence. We build our sense of safety on things staying recognizable. We make plans that assume tomorrow will cooperate. When the child builds that sandcastle, there's a kind of forgetting that has to happen, a looking away from the water. We do this looking away constantly. You can feel it in your own hands right now. Think of something you love, not in abstract, but specifically. A person, a place, a season of your life, a version of yourself. Notice what happens in your chest when you bring it close. There's warmth, yes. But underneath, if you're honest, there's also a gripping, a subtle clench. This is the demand. The quiet insistence that this should not change, that you should get to keep it exactly as it is. Now, let yourself know, just for a moment, that you won't. Not because something terrible will happen, but because everything is already happening. The thing you love is not standing still. It's alive, which means it's moving. And you can either move with it or exhaust yourself trying to pin it in place. This is where the practice becomes very simple. Hold something you love and acknowledge it will not last forever. Not as a thought experiment, actually do it. Pick up a photograph, sit across from someone dear. Feel the fabric of a shirt you've worn for years. Let yourself register the warmth, the detail, the specific there-ness of it. And then quietly let yourself know it won't always be here. Not to punish yourself, not to prepare for tragedy, just to stop pretending. What happens when you do this is unexpected. The ache arrives, yes. There's a tender bruising where the grip was. But underneath the ache, something else. A kind of release. Because you've been holding so tightly, and tight holding is exhausting. When you let yourself know that this will change, you also let yourself be here with it now, not later, not in the preserved version. Now, while it's still moving, still breathing, still real. The child's hands keep building even as the first thin sheet of water slides toward the moat. And maybe this isn't denial, maybe it's something wiser. The building matters because it won't last. The shaping matters because the tide is real. If the castle were permanent, it would just be architecture. Because it's temporary, it's love. You don't have to like impermanence. You don't have to smile at loss or pretend it doesn't hurt. But you can stop demanding that reality apologize for being what it is. You can stop treating change as a flaw in the system. The system is change. Your life is change. And everything you love is love because it's here now, not because you managed to make it stay. When you hold what you love and let yourself know it will not last, you're not rehearsing grief, you're practicing honesty. And honesty, it turns out, is gentler than the constant work of pretending. The ache is real, but so is the release. Both can be true, both are. There is a moment that happens quietly, often when we are tired or distracted. Someone cuts in front of us in line, a colleague speaks over us in a meeting, a family member says the thing they always say, the one that lands like a small stone in the chest. And in that moment, something closes. Not dramatically, just a slight tightening, a pulling back. The warmth we might have felt toward a friend or a stranger we admire, it does not extend here. Not to this person, not right now. We do not usually think of this as a decision about compassion. It feels more automatic than that, more justified. This person was rude. That person does not listen. They should know better. And beneath these thoughts is a quiet sorting, a dividing of the world into those who have earned our kindness and those who have not. The teaching from the Mahayana tradition does not argue with this impulse. It simply places something else beside it. May all beings be free from suffering, without exception. Not just the ones who are easy to love. Not just the ones who have been kind to us first. All beings. The difficult neighbor. The politician whose views make our stomach turn. The person we have decided is too far gone, too selfish, too much. This is not a demand. It is an invitation to notice what happens when we make compassion conditional. When we say, silently, that someone must meet a certain standard before they are worthy of our care. What we're really doing is carrying a kind of ledger, a running account of who deserves what. And this ledger is heavy. It requires constant updating. It keeps us in the position of judge, always evaluating, always withholding or granting approval. Sunlight does not work this way. It falls on the garden we tend and the weeds we wish were not there. It warms the face of the person who smiled at us this morning and the face of the person who looked right through us. It does not choose. It does not check credentials. It simply moves according to its nature, without preference, without exception. When we hold our compassion back from someone, we often believe we are protecting something, our integrity perhaps, our sense of justice. We do not want to condone harmful behavior. We do not want to be naive, and this is understandable. But what we are actually protecting, most of the time, is a story. The story that says this person is fundamentally different from us, that their suffering is less real, less urgent, less worthy of attention. The three marks of existence, impermanence, non-self, and suffering, do not make exceptions either. They do not apply only to people we like. The person who frustrates us is also caught in conditions they did not choose. They are also shaped by causes beyond their control. They are also subject to change, to loss, to the quiet ache of wanting things to be different than they are. When we see this, even for a moment, the ledger becomes harder to maintain. This does not mean we must agree with everyone. It does not mean we ignore harm or pretend that hurtful behavior is acceptable. Compassion is not the same as approval. It is simply the recognition that suffering is suffering, regardless of who is experiencing it, and that our own peace is not served by withholding care. So, the practice is small and specific. Today, bring to mind one person you find difficult. Not the most difficult person in your life, not the one whose name makes your jaw tighten, just someone who irritates you, someone you have been avoiding or resenting in a low-grade way. Picture them for a moment. Notice what arises. The resistance, the justifications, the reasons why they do not deserve your kindness. And then, without needing to change any of that, silently offer them this: may you be free from suffering. You do not need to feel it deeply. You do not need to mean it with your whole heart. You're simply placing the words there, like sunlight that falls without asking permission. May you be at ease. May you be free from pain. You can say it once, or you can say it several times. You can notice the resistance and say it anyway. This is not about them. It is about what happens inside you when you stop withholding. When you let the compassion move without checking first whether it has been earned, you may feel nothing. You may feel a small softening. You may feel more resistance. All of these are fine. The practice is not to generate a particular feeling. It is simply to offer the words, to let them exist in the space between you and this person without needing anything in return. Compassion that waits for the right conditions is not yet free. It is still tangled in preference, still measuring, still holding back. But compassion that moves like sunlight, that falls without exception, asks nothing of the other person. It does not need them to change or apologize or even know that you have wished them well. It is complete in the offering itself. You wake in the middle of the night and the mind is already moving. What did I forget? What comes next? What if this goes wrong? The body tightens around questions it cannot answer. And beneath all of it, a single current, the need to know. We build our lives on the assumption that clarity is coming, that one day soon the fog will lift, that if we think hard enough, plan carefully enough, gather enough information, we will finally stand on solid ground. But the ground keeps shifting. The answers we find today become questions again tomorrow, and still we reach for certainty as though it were oxygen. This reaching is not a mistake. It is how the mind tries to protect you. It believes that knowing will keep you safe. That understanding will stop the falling. But the falling never stops. The bird in flight does not need to see the ground to trust the air. It rides what is already holding it. The Buddha taught 3 marks of existence, 3 characteristics that appear in all conditioned things: impermanence, suffering, non-self. These are not ideas to believe. They are patterns you can observe directly in your own experience right now. The breath rises and falls. A thought appears and dissolves. The mood that felt permanent an hour ago has already shifted. Nothing stays, nothing is separate, nothing is solid in the way we want it to be. And this is where the clinging begins. Not to things themselves, but to the hope that they will stop changing. That this feeling will last. That this understanding will hold. That I will finally know who I am and what to do. The mind wraps itself around certainty like a fist around sand. There is a Zen teaching that says not knowing is most intimate. At first this sounds like a riddle. We have been taught that knowledge brings closeness, that understanding is connection. But intimacy is not the same as mastery. Intimacy is meeting what is here without needing it to be different. It is touching life directly, before the mind sorts it into categories, before it becomes a problem to solve. When you do not know, you are present. When you do not know, you are listening. The moment you think you have arrived at the answer, the shutters close. You stop seeing what is actually in front of you. You see only your conclusion. But when you allow not knowing, the world stays open. The bird in flight does not consult a map. It feels the wind, it adjusts, it moves with what is. This does not mean you stop thinking. It does not mean you abandon discernment or responsibility. It means you stop demanding that the mind deliver a final answer. You stop treating uncertainty as a failure. You notice when confusion arises, and instead of tightening around it, you pause. You say inwardly, I do not know, not as defeat, not as resignation, as truth. Try it now with something small, a decision you have been circling, a question that will not resolve, a feeling you cannot name. Let the mind present its usual urgency. Let it insist that you must figure this out. And then gently say the words, I do not know. Notice what happens in the body. Notice whether the breath deepens or the shoulders drop. Notice whether there is, even for a moment, space. At first, not knowing may feel like falling. The mind will panic. It will reach for old answers, for distractions, for anything that feels like ground. This is natural. You have been taught to fear the unknown. But if you stay with it, something shifts. The panic softens. The reaching slows. And what remains is not emptiness. It is presence. It is the texture of this moment, exactly as it is, without the overlay of your conclusions. You begin to see that most of your suffering is not the situation itself. It is the story you tell about what it means, the interpretation, the prediction, the need to know what comes next. When you release that need, even briefly, the situation is still here. But it is lighter, it breathes. This is not a practice of giving up, it is a practice of coming home, of meeting the three marks directly. Impermanence, I do not know what will last. Suffering, I do not know how to make this stop hurting in the way I want. Non-self, I do not know who I will be tomorrow. And in that not knowing, the clinging loosens. The fist opens, the bird rides the air that was holding it all along. When confusion arises, pause, say the words, let them be simple and true. And notice when not knowing begins to feel less like a threat and more like relief. That is the moment the ground stops mattering. That is the moment you realize you have been flying the whole time. There is a way we hold on to things, not just with our hands, but with our whole being. We grip thoughts, grip plans, grip the feeling of who we think we are. And underneath that grip is a quiet fear. The fear says, if I let go, I will have nothing. If I release what I am holding, I will fall into emptiness and disappear. This fear feels reasonable. It feels like protection. But watch what happens to an open hand. It can receive what a closed fist cannot. The fist protects what it already holds, but it cannot take in anything new. It cannot feel the air. It cannot be touched by rain or sunlight. The open hand is vulnerable, yes, but it is also alive to the world. The early teachings speak of three marks that appear in all experience: impermanence, suffering that arises from clinging, and the absence of a solid, separate self. These are not beliefs to adopt. They are observations you can make right now in your own life. Look at any experience closely and you will see it changing. Look at any moment of struggle and you will find some form of holding on. Look for the one who is holding and you will find only more experience, more sensations, more thoughts arising and passing. When you understand these three marks, something shifts. Not because you have learned a philosophy, but because you have seen something true. You have seen that what you are gripping was never grippable in the first place. It was always moving, always changing, always beyond your control. And yet we grip anyway. We grip our preferences. We grip our version of how today should have gone. We grip the story of what someone said to us, turning it over and over in our minds. We grip yesterday's mistake and tomorrow's worry. We carry them with us into the evening, into the quiet, into bed. The teaching is simple. When you let go of everything, what remains is peace. Not the peace that comes from getting what you want, not the peace of finally being safe, but the peace that was already here underneath the holding. This does not mean you become passive. It does not mean you stop caring. An open hand can still act. It can still reach out, still hold what needs holding. But it does not confuse holding with clinging. It does not confuse care with control. Before you sleep tonight, you can try something, not as a task, not as one more thing to get right, but as a small kindness you offer yourself. Release one thing you have been carrying today. It might be a conversation that did not go the way you hoped. It might be a task you did not finish. It might be the feeling that you should have been different, better, more than you were. You do not need to solve it. You do not need to fix it or understand it completely. You only need to notice that you are holding it. Feel where it lives in your body. Feel the tightness in your chest or your shoulders or your jaw. And then gently let your awareness touch it the way you would touch something delicate. Not pushing it away, not pulling it closer. Just acknowledging that it is here and that you have been carrying it. And then see if you can set it down, just for now, just for this moment before sleep. You can always pick it up again tomorrow if you need to, but right now, see what it feels like to open your hand. When you do this, you may notice something. The thing you were carrying does not disappear. The situation has not changed, but something in you has softened. There is a little more space, a little more room to breathe. And in that space, you might feel it. The quiet that was always here. The peace that does not depend on anything being different than it is. This is not a trick of the mind. This is what happens when you stop fighting with reality, when you stop insisting that this moment should be other than it is. The moment itself has not changed, but your relationship to it has. You are no longer at war. And in that quiet, you may begin to sense what the teaching points to, that letting go is not loss, it is release. It is the end of a struggle that was never necessary. What remains is not nothing. What remains is the simple fact of being here, awake, aware. And that is enough. The open hand rests. It does not need to prove anything. It does not need to hold the world together. It simply remains open, receiving what comes, releasing what goes. And in that openness, there is a kind of peace that asks nothing of you. We've been looking together at these three marks, these three characteristics that run through all of our experience. Not as abstract ideas, but as living observations available right now in the body, in the breath, in the way sounds arise and pass, in the way thoughts form and dissolve. Perhaps what becomes clear is that these three aren't separate teachings at all. They move together. When you see impermanence clearly, you begin to notice how suffering arises from trying to hold what cannot be held. And when you see both of those, the question of self becomes quieter, less urgent. What you thought was solid turns out to be a process, a stream, a series of conditions meeting and parting. This isn't meant to be depressing. It's meant to be liberating. When you stop insisting that things be permanent, when you stop demanding that experience conform to your preferences, when you stop defending a fixed idea of who you are, something softens. The grip loosens. Not because you've achieved anything, but because you've stopped adding extra layers of tension to what's already here. The breath comes in, the breath goes out. You didn't make that happen. Sounds appear in awareness. You didn't summon them. Thoughts arrive, linger, fade. You didn't author them in the way you might think. All of this is already flowing. The three marks are just pointing to what's been true all along. What changes is your relationship to it. You begin to meet impermanence without panic. You begin to notice craving and clinging as they arise, not as moral failures, but as natural movements of mind that you can see and release. You begin to hold your sense of self more lightly, not because you've erased yourself, but because you've seen that what you call self is more like weather than stone. And in that lighter holding, there's more room. Room for things to be as they are. Room for others to be as they are. Room for your own experience to unfold without constant commentary and correction. This is what the Buddha meant by ease, by peace. Not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of the extra suffering we add when we fight against the way things move. You don't have to become a different person to see this. You don't have to transcend your humanity or escape your life. The three marks are visible in ordinary moments, in the cooling of tea, in the end of a conversation, in the way a mood shifts when you're not looking, in the way you can't quite locate the thinker of your thoughts when you look closely. This practice isn't about perfection, it's about recognition. And recognition doesn't happen once and stay forever. It comes and goes. Some days you see clearly. Some days you forget entirely and get lost in old patterns. That's fine. That's part of the process too. The path isn't a straight line. It's more like returning again and again to what's true, each time with a little more familiarity, a little less resistance. If you'd like to continue exploring these foundations, there are other videos here that move slowly through the terrain of early Buddhist practice. No rush. They'll be here when you're ready. For now, let yourself rest in what you've heard. Let it settle without forcing understanding. The three marks aren't puzzles to solve. They're invitations to look, to notice, to soften around what you find. And maybe, as you move back into your day or into sleep, you might carry this question with you, not to answer it, but to live with it. If everything you experience is impermanent, if clinging to it causes tension, if there's no fixed self at the center holding it all together, then what remains when you stop trying to make it otherwise?